Good evening. Welcome to Peacock Alley. This is Gary Eminent with your host, Dale Wetzel.
Greetings.
Good evening, Dale. We're hoping your voice can hold up tonight. I know you're fighting a cold and all that other good stuff.
I fought the cold and the cold won.
We're going to see. I think you're going to beat it tonight. We're going to give it a try. So we're broadcasting live here from Peacock Alley, and tonight is Teeny Tuesday, Dale. So those of you out there driving, Teeny Tuesday means 2-for-1 martinis. So it looks like everybody in Bismarck's down here tonight having one of those.
Indeed it does. I mean, I had no idea that martinis were so popular in Bismarck.
Well, they sure are tonight, and they have $2 off on appetizers until 10 o'clock. So
maybe that's it, too. It could be the appetizers as well.
They do a great job in their kitchen. They got a great chef down here, Dusty, who does a great job. I noticed the restaurant's full tonight, so it's going to be a busy night down at Peacock. And I think everybody's getting ready to stay home for the next 2 nights when it's going to be 25, 30 below the next couple nights, so that people are maybe going to go out and have a little fun tonight. So I'm going to stay home tomorrow night because I don't have to be here. So, Dale,
I was going to say, you're going to stay home tomorrow night, but I can't.
Yeah, well, we'll see.
I'm envious of you.
So, Dale, busy day at the Legislature today. You want to give us a little recap before we go to our guest and tell us, what happened up there today?
Well, one of the unusual things about today was that we had a couple of bills to raise taxes. And
oh, my goodness.
One of them, we have the sponsor of that bill with us this evening. We're going to discuss it. It was to increase the cigarette tax in North Dakota from 44 cents a pack to $1 a pack. The other one is a corporate income tax increase, sponsored by Park River Senator Joe Miller. I'm sure he would not describe it that way, but this is what the bill does. It institutes a flat corporate income tax rate of 4.67%. So right now there's a 3-tiered structure of corporate income tax in North Dakota, and the tax rate for the first $25,000 of income is 1.68%. From $25,000 to $50,000, it's 4.23%, and for $50,000 or more, or I should say more than $50,000, it's 5.15%. What Joe Miller's bill would do is to institute a flat corporate tax rate of 4.67%. This would keep it reasonably revenue neutral, and it would result in a tax reduction for folks who have more than $50,000 worth of profit to pay taxes on, and a tax increase for folks who have less than $50,000 to pay taxes on. We also have had a number of abortion bills in House Judiciary, or Senate Judiciary, I should say, the Senate Judiciary Committee. It's fair to say that they're all designed to prohibit abortion in North Dakota. They encourage the recognition of a fertilized egg as a human being, given that fertilized egg the full panoply of human rights. And it says one bill says physicians may not perform abortions in North Dakota. Another one says that doctors who perform abortions have to be licensed to practice in North Dakota and also have admitting privileges at a local hospital. And this would make it more difficult for the abortion clinic in Fargo. North Dakota only has one abortion provider, and it is in Fargo. It's designed to make it more difficult for them to be able to bring in physicians from out of state to perform abortions. It also says that a staff member trained in cardiopulmonary resuscitation must be present at all times when the abortion facility is open. And there is a similar law to this in Mississippi that was passed by the Mississippi Legislature. It is now being challenged in federal court. And we had some bills to reduce income taxes on individuals and corporations. Those are fairly common in this session because of the budget surplus has attracted a number of tax cut bills. And Gary, I think I've prattled on too long here. Why don't we just get to our guests?
That sounds great, Dale. Let's do it. That's going to be a fun subject to talk about.
Yes, one of the bills that I mentioned earlier was a bill to raise the cigarette tax and the tax on cigarettes only, not tax on pipe tobacco or whatnot. The tax on cigarettes from 44 cents a pack to $1 per pack. And we have here as the sponsor of that bill, Representative Elliot Glassheim of Grand Forks. He's a Democrat. He's a former Grand Forks city councilman. He was in the legislature in the 1970s as a rebellious student. Now he's still in the legislature as somewhat more rebellious, older, mature gentleman.
Mature, that's right.
And we have also Representative Patrick Hattlestead of Williston, who is a member of the House Finance Tax Committee, and he was one of the folks who listened to the presentation on this tobacco tax bill today. And first of all, welcome, gentlemen. And Mr. Glassheim, can you just describe why you introduced your bill and what it does?
Well, what it does is simple. It raises the tobacco tax from 44 cents to $1, so it raises it 56 cents. The purpose of the bill is not to raise money, however. We have sufficient funds in the general fund. The purpose of the bill is to help people stop smoking and to help teens not start smoking. And, you know, the financial impetus for the bill is that everyone who smokes adds to all of our costs for insurance, for Medicaid, for hospital non-payment, hundreds of millions of dollars a year. We all pay when people get from smoking, get cancer, get serious heart disease. That's all included in our premiums because it raises the cost of medical care for everybody. So this is an attempt to lower the cost by giving them financial incentives or disincentives for smoking.
How would, if we had a cigarette tax, a state cigarette tax of $1 a pack, how would this compare to our neighboring states?
South Dakota, Minnesota, and Montana are all upwards of $1.50. So I think $1.70 in Montana, $1.50 something 6 or 7 in Minnesota. So we would still be significantly lower than our surrounding states, and we'd be significantly lower than the national average, which is $1.40 for all states and $1.60 for non-tobacco growing states. North Dakota's tax has not been raised, I know, at least since 1999, but somebody I heard today, somebody else in the hearing, I think said 1993 was the last time it was raised.
Yeah, it's been 20 years, yes.
Yeah. So going to $1 would not put us in the highest bracket. We're 45th in the country, 45th lowest in the country. So I'm always an incrementalist and want to go in slow steps, rather than giant leaps. And so I thought this would still put us in a reasonable position relative to all the other states.
So a doubling of the cigarette tax is an incremental step, huh?
Well, if you look at it as doubling, yes. But if you look at it as over 20 years, it would be more like 5% a year.
Okay. Representative Hattlestead, what do you think of the need to raise the tax on cigarettes?
Well, I guess, number one, I'm opposed to raising taxes. I don't see a need for that. Secondly, the question, I have two questions in my mind about the issue, and that's whether we want to use tax policy as a part of social engineering. We want people to quit smoking. I don't think there's anybody out there that doesn't admit that smoking is bad for you. There's enough literature out there. You'd have to have your head buried in the sand not to know it's harmful. But I'm not sure that tax policy is the way we want to do our social engineering. The second thing is we have choices in this country. There's a personal choice. Now, there are a lot of people that have tried to quit, and I think the smoking group has a great deal of money that they are using in an attempt to help people quit. And I've not smoked, so when Elliot talked today about the difficulty in quitting, I guess I'd have to rely on my addiction to chocolate.
Okay.
I'm not sure I could give that up either. But people have choices, and I think they have to make choices. And I would hate to think that we're going to use tax policy as a means of doing that. I think education, and I think the smoking group or anti-smoking group has spent a great deal of money at trying to educate people. And I guess I'm concerned that the young people who should be the most knowledgeable, because the schools flood them with information on the evils of smoking, don't seem to be buying the issue for some reason. And we see a lot of young people smoking, which is truly tragic. I mean, for the older adult, you make a decision, okay, that's your fault. But for the younger ones, you would hope that education would eliminate that situation. So far, apparently it is not.
Do you think, Representative Hattlestead, that what you just mentioned about the proliferation of information in schools that says you should not smoke, it is bad for your health, do you think that it has perhaps the opposite effect on a young person who wants to do something that goes against the grain, so to speak?
Well, I suppose there are a few out there that would do that. I don't know. Maybe it's a group thing. You get in a group and they start passing cigarettes around, and it could be that little touch of rebellion maybe that every one of us at least tried, as I remember in my youth, tried the cigar and all that, looked cool. But I would hope the information out there, and when I was at the high school, we brought in people that had smoked, that had chewed, that had lost part of their face, that had working on one lung, and you'd think that, boy, that would have tremendous effect on the kids, but I don't know if they're naive or they just say it won't happen to me. I'm not going to do that. So, but I would hope that education would be the way that we would approach it, and not using tax policy for social engineering.
What do you think about the idea that, other than social engineering, by making cigarettes more expensive to buy, that people will buy less of them, fewer of them?
Well, that's the statistics that were presented today. The more expensive it gets, the less they're going to smoke. I guess from what I've seen in other areas of a person's life, if you want it bad enough, you'll cut out something else. So if you're a smoker, if you like smoking, or if you're unfortunately addicted to it, you'll find a way to come up with the extra money. And as Elliot said, he's taking it in smaller increments. $1.56 increase is not going to break very many people. So I think they would continue to buy. I do agree that smoking is bad for you. I would not argue with Elliot on that situation. I don't think, as one of the individuals mentioned today, there probably isn't anybody out there that doesn't know that smoking is bad for you. The question is, person makes a choice. I guess we make choices every day. And unfortunately, in this case, that's a bad choice.
We're talking to Representative Patrick Hattlestead of Williston. He's a Republican. And Democratic Representative Elliot Glassheim of Grand Forks. Mr. Glassheim has introduced a bill to raise the cigarette tax in North Dakota to $1 a pack from 44 cents. Representative Glassheim, do you think that this tax increase is regressive?
I think there are statistics showing that lower income people disproportionately are smokers relative to other things. And you know, at first that bothered me, that I would then be hurting them. On the other hand, I'm trying to save their lives. So if it may be regressive, but if 2, 3, 4% of them stop smoking, that'll be good. And I need to, you know, it's not all or nothing. Raising 56 cents a pack is not going to stop everybody from smoking. A lot of people will continue, but the figures we had are that it would lower smoking by about 3 or 4%. And so that's my goal. Not everybody's going to do it. And, of course, it's still a choice. It's just a choice to buy them at 50 cents more expensive. And we use the social engineering argument, I think, is flawed because we use money penalties all the time. What are traffic fines? An attempt to change people's behavior. I mean, what are grants to businesses to try to locate here? An attempt to change their behavior. We use taxes, tax relief, tax policy all the time to influence people's behavior. And so this is one behavior that I think if we get 3 or 4% decrease in smokers, there's about 18.5% of North Dakotans are smokers now. If we get 3 or 4% decrease, I'll feel good about that. That'll be successful.
To what extent do you think the fact that we have now fairly strict laws against smoking in the workplace in North Dakota is going to motivate people to quit, aside from the price of tobacco? One of the complaints I've heard from smokers is that, well, I quit because I couldn't smoke anywhere anymore. I couldn't smoke in the bar. I couldn't smoke in the bowling alley. I couldn't smoke within 20 feet of the door of a public place. And it's like I'm made to feel like a leper in my own country. And this is why I quit. It wasn't the cost of the cigarettes. It was the social ostracism that I encountered.
That works.
How much of that is a motivation?
I think that's a motivator for some people too. That is a motivator, and I'm sure it's increased. And that kind of thing is also educational. That is, you find the debates over secondhand smoke, especially where you're hurting somebody else by your smoking, have made people reconsider, as well as the feeling of shame and ostracism and all of those things you refer to. I'm just hoping to add one more motivation on top of all of these things. I don't think there's one thing you do that solves every problem, but this is just one additional tool to help people motivate themselves to make better choices.
Elliot, I got a question for you. Does this does it include electronic cigarettes? Is there a tax on electronic cigarettes or cigars, or what is it? Is it a percentage related to that?
No, the bill doesn't, and in fact, I've been criticized by some of the anti-smoking groups. The fastest increase is non-cigarette tobacco.
Yeah.
Well, electronic, but also chewing and other.
Okay.
So tax collections are rising in non-cigarette tobacco, and so in a way, it really should be broadened. If I were totally consistent, but this bill doesn't do that.
The reason I ask that is I know a couple of people that quit smoking and smoked electronic cigarettes for the nicotine or whatever they're getting out of it.
Yeah.
But I don't know if that hurts them. It just lets steam out. There's no secondhand smoke. It's secondhand steam. So I'm not sure why you would need to tax that. Maybe if everybody smoked electronic cigarettes, we could not have any problem. We could eliminate the tax, huh?
I think it's less harmful. Most of the harm comes from the flame and the burning, I think.
That's what I thought.
Of the tobacco, but the electronic is just the nicotine, right?
Yeah, that's what I understand.
Hey, Gary, why don't you explain what an electronic cigarette is?
Oh, that's good.
Well, there's really three components. There's a filter, and then there's a battery that allows you to draw, and there's a nicotine with a cartridge in it that you're able to just smoke it like a cigarette. My sister-in-law happens to be one of them, and when I first saw her do it, I thought it looked like a Bic pen she had in her mouth, because they become, they might have a pink flame, a purple flame, and they all light up. And so when they set it down, I always think they're going to burn it, or they're going to, it's kind of a weird the way it is. But you're able to draw. It's a cartridge and a battery that injects, works with the battery, and there's three components to it, and that allows you to get the benefit of transitioning from the addiction to the nicotine. And I don't think nicotine really hurts you that bad. From what I understand, it's really a function of the smoke, Elliot, as I understand it, but I'm not an expert in this. And I think the idea with it is it allows people to transition away from the harmful portion of cigarettes.
So it's basically a way to suck nicotine vapor into your lungs?
I suppose it is, but imagine it's like, I like caffeine in the morning, so...
Well, no, I wasn't trying to be critical. I was just trying to kind of understand it.
Yeah, that's what I'm guessing, I guess.
Representative Hattelstead, what do you think about Representative Glassheim's argument that state government or government generally engages in all sorts of social engineering, such as raising traffic fines and having tax incentives to do certain things? Do you think there's a point there?
Well, I think he has a point. I think Elliot is a good thinker. I mean, he doesn't stand up and say anything that isn't well thought out. So Elliot has some very strong arguments, even though we're on different sides of the aisle. I don't always agree with him, but I know when he stands up that what he's going to say makes sense, and it's not just off the cuff, flippant out there.
I'm sure he'll be glad to hear that.
I'm very honored. Thank you. Thank you.
But we do disagree on some things. Would I like to see everybody quit smoking? Absolutely. But I think, and you alluded to the people that quit because they were ostracized here and ostracized there. I thought we had enough refreshment stands, such as this one, the Peacock, where a person, you could have a smoker's bar. If the people wanted to smoke and socialize, they could do that. I didn't think we needed to eliminate all of them. The workplace, I have no problem with that. You're influencing other people. Secondary smoke, okay, I don't smoke. I don't like smoke. I don't like the smell on my clothes. I shouldn't have to experience that. But if I wanted to go socialize, there should be some place that I can go, that I can make a personal decision, and everybody in the bar has made the same decision. We should be able to sit down and smoke. So part of it's a personal choice.
One of the reasons I mentioned ostracism is because you gentlemen have seen this. On the west entrance of the Capitol, there is essentially a large barrel that's been set way to the side near the entrance, the west entrance of the Capitol, and that's where people go to smoke. And when I've been out there at the times when people were taking smoke breaks, they're grouped around there like it's a leper colony. I mean, it's just like, oh, they're grouped around this place. It's more than 20 feet away. It's like, okay, you people go over there and do your dirty habit. And I just thought, geez, this really, it just made me feel bad.
You have to be strong to be a smoker.
Yes, you do. We have here with us this evening Representative Elliot Glassheim, a Democrat from Grand Forks. He's the introducer of a bill to raise the cigarette tax from 44 cents a pack to $1 a pack. We also have Williston Representative Patrick Cattlestead, a Republican, who have been with us tonight to discuss this issue. Thank you both, gentlemen.
Dale, I would say one of the things that if it came down to was 56 cents a pack, or if it was standing outside on a tomorrow night when it's 28 below, that'd be more apt to get me to quit smoking. So,
I mean, maybe the slogan should be, "Are you tough enough to smoke?"
So we're broadcasting live from Peacock Alley, talking to Dale Wetzel, your host of the Legislature today. We'll be talking to you after the break. Thanks for joining us tonight. Welcome back to Peacock Alley. This is Gary Emeneth with Dale Wetzel, your host. Tonight is Teeny Tuesday, Peacock Alley, 2-for-1 martinis and $2 off appetizers until 10 o'clock. So the bar is very busy, but I see a couple tables thinned out. So if you're out driving around, Dale, my voice is going, I think it's rubbing off.
Gary, do you drink martinis?
I do not.
You drink everything else.
I do not drink martinis. Just wine and a little beer, maybe more beer than I should. But I'm drinking water tonight.
Okay, good.
But I'm not a martini guy.
But martinis, I mean, is it shaken, stirred, gin, vodka? Do you have any views on this subject?
I have no views on it other than it's way too complicated for me. But I bet there's a possibility one of these three young men here maybe knows something about it.
Yes, maybe we'll inquire about their taste in martinis as well as their taste in legislation. We have this evening, we're going to be talking about the Facebook bill. It is a bill that says that an employer may not, as part of a job application or interview, request a password and username for someone who's applied for a job in order that employer may access private information on a person's social networking account. The primary sponsor of the bill is Representative Ben Hansen. He's a Democrat from West Fargo. We have him with us this evening. We also have a couple of co-sponsors. We have Mr. Joshua Boshi, who is a Democrat from Fargo. And we have Representative Tom Beadle, who is a Republican from Fargo, a very, very Fargo-centric bill, but I'm sure it is of interest to anyone who has a Facebook account. Mr. Hansen, could you please explain to me what this bill does and why you put it in?
I could. And can I also offer you a lodgings, maybe?
I've already taken care of on that score. I appreciate the offer, though.
You bet. Well, basically what this bill does, there's two parts of what this bill does. The first part makes sure that if someone is to pass away, that their accounts within social networks are passed on to their inheritors, whoever they might be, as specified in their will. And the second part speaks to what you were talking about before, which is employers may not require personal access information into one's social networking account, whether it be Facebook, Tumblr, any of the networks that are out there, or will be created. And it also says that an employer cannot force you to log on to your account in order for them to view it. Anything that is public is still public. Anything, any kind of workplace rules, such as not using social networks at work, still apply. This is simply a privacy protection bill that has been passed in 6 other states this year by both Democratic and Republican legislatures, and I think I felt it was the time that we make sure and get ahead of this so we don't have to wait another 2 years before we do so with how quickly technology has been moving.
And just so that we're clear, this does not prevent an employer from looking at publicly available information on a social network about someone that anyone could look at.
Not at all. Absolutely not. That'd be impossible. A, that'd be impossible to enforce, and B, there'd be no point in that.
Before we get into that, I wanted to ask all 3 of you gentlemen one question. Did any of you think about what would happen to your social network sites and passwords, etc., when you died, and whether you should include this in your will? I thought that was a fascinating statement that Representative Hansen just made. Mr. Boshi, is that something that ever crossed your mind? What happens to your Facebook site when you leave this world?
Well, Dale, it certainly wasn't anything I thought of when I signed up for Facebook. But having worked on a college campus, I interact with a lot of my students through Facebook, and they have Facebook accounts, and unfortunately every once in a while one of our students dies. And what we've really found is that there's been a mix between, some students who their remaining Facebook posthumously is it's kind of a memorial of them. Every once in a while people are writing notes saying I miss you and whatnot. And in other cases, parents are contacting us trying to figure out, how do we shut this down? We don't want that out there anymore. We don't want people thinking that our son or daughter is still alive when in fact, this is very painful and it hasn't happened. So working on a college campus, I've definitely had to think about it again, and have given my parents the envelope to open if the time ever comes, and they can do what they want with that.
And can you tell us what you do? You mentioned your job on a campus.
Yeah, I serve as the Assistant Director of Leadership and Organization at Minnesota State University Moorhead. So I work with our student organizations and leadership programs.
Mr. Beadle, is that something that you ever thought about when you signed up for Facebook, is what happens to this site when I leave this world?
Well, I didn't exactly think about it when I signed up for Facebook, because obviously when I signed up for Facebook, I was a high school student, or actually college student, because at that time you could only be in college to join Facebook. And so I didn't think about it at that point, but since then, what I've noticed is when you see tragic accidents occur, like Representative Boucher was talking about, where you'll have somebody pass away, it does become a living memorial. This past spring, my girlfriend's aunt passed away, and her Facebook still is existing as a living memorial. It's being managed by her daughter, and it's kind of a way for people to be able to grieve. Similarly, when former Senator Bob Stengen passed away, his Facebook account was still up for a while, and then it's been converted, and then they created a Remembering Bob Stengen group. So that people were able to go there as kind of a living memorial, because it really is kind of a new system that's out there, and it's kind of a change of the way we live our lives, because now everyone's putting everything up online. And if you think about it, who takes real photos anymore? I know Gary just took one with his phone. There's digital photos everywhere, and so people put those on their social media sites. They don't keep a hard physical copy in the photo album anymore. And so if you want to make sure that you have access to some of those things, then really social media is the way to go. And this bill is not just Facebook that it deals with this, but it's all social media accounts. Because if you've got a Flickr account, that's social media. That's where a lot of people will store their photos or whatever. And that's kind of a place where people will go to remember stuff.
Yeah, I'm afraid I was using Facebook as kind of a metaphor for the whole social media universe. Representative Hansen, have you actually heard in North Dakota of employers doing what you seek to prohibit?
No, I have not. It has been more the behavior of, well, not the behavior, it's been more the mode of operation of large multinational corporations, Fortune 500 caliber corporations, looking to preserve their company image amongst young CEO types or people that they're breeding to be CEOs. They want them to be positive and upbeat at all times, but also always about the company, and they don't want a lot of either parting pictures or dour attitudes on there. And while I do understand that, many, not just myself, but many in many other states and legislatures felt they crossed the line when they began requiring not just to see their Facebook, but also their actual password, their login information which doesn't just contain a public profile, but personal messages, maybe some information about their bank accounts if they use it to pay for ads. It really, to me, seemed like an intrusion of privacy, and I have a lot of folks that agree with me. So,
does this apply to someone who is working for a company?
Yes.
If you're already an employee. Okay.
Correct.
So it applies not only to job applicants, but job employees as well.
Correct.
Okay.
In case that company should institute something like that. Again, we haven't seen anything like that in North Dakota yet, but considering the ever-accelerating pace of technology and how it's taking over our world and our state, we want to make sure we're out in front of it. And with the legislature that only meets every other year, we might as well be prepared for it. And I thought basic privacy rights are a universally agreed upon aspect of our daily lives, so I thought, why not pass it now?
You mentioned 6 other states. I believe they are California, Illinois, Maryland, Michigan, Delaware, and New Jersey. And in some of those states, this bill applies to higher education.
Correct.
And colleges, and I don't believe that yours does.
It does not.
Why is that?
I want to include this. I basically wanted this as an opening volley, and if others came and requested that, we'd take a look at that, maybe amend it, maybe expand it in the future. I basically just want to plant the flag in the ground, make sure this got done on the principle, and we can move on to higher education from there. If need be. I'd
like to ask all 3 of you gentlemen, what sort of feedback have you heard about this? Is this a problem or a potential problem that people are even aware of? Mr. Boshi.
Yeah, prior to working at MSUM, my last job at North Dakota State University was in the Career Center. So this was a conversation we had on a regular basis, working with employers as far as how they interviewed and what information they required as part of an interview or a job applicant. While many employers within our region aren't necessarily accessing this information yet, there were a number of national organizations coming in that were considering it. And as technology continues to evolve faster than we can create laws or safeguards, the case law hasn't even caught up to it. So the legality of an employer or an institution of higher education asking for that information and requiring it as part of an application hasn't even caught up yet, so we don't even know. So a bill like this actually could potentially be a safeguard for some of our employers who may not have access to legal counsel or not be thinking about that. We can kind of set that up ahead of time for them.
Mr. Beadle, what sort of feedback have you heard about this from constituents, if you've heard any, and to what extent do you think that there's public awareness that this might be an issue?
Well, to be honest, I haven't had much feedback from constituents yet on this bill. And I think a big reason for that is not a lot of people actually pay attention to what's going on for the first few weeks in the legislature, so stuff's able to slide under the radar a little bit. It's only after the bills get traction on shows like this, as well as the other news media outlets, that it starts to get picked up, and oftentimes that's when we're getting close to the vote, not when we're just getting close to the committee hearing. As far as where the genesis of this bill comes from and where some of the concerns come about is, if you remember this past summer when Facebook changed their privacy settings, there was some national news media attention going towards this, because some of the stuff that Facebook was saying is that what the information you put up there belongs to Facebook. It becomes the ownership of Facebook. And so that's where Section 1 of this bill is just basically trying to create some statutory law so that courts, whenever they would have to resolve any sort of a dispute over this, would have something to look back on to say, well, listen, I know you have a privacy agreement on Facebook. However, if you look at some of the practical law that's in place, this kind of gives a precedent that people are able to take. And so I haven't heard too much from my constituents about what this bill is doing so far, but it is a good framework and a good basis for us to build off of going forward. And back to a previous question you asked Representative Hansen, as far as, do we have issues with employers trying to look and access accounts? We really haven't, but I have been aware of a constituent in my district who had been fired, this is about 2 years ago now, but they were fired because they had a bad day at work and they put up a Facebook post, just blasting their employer. And it was seen by their friends because their privacy settings were such that it was that, but they were friends with other coworkers, and so it got back to their employer. The employer was like, listen, we don't want you talking bad about us, and they terminated the individual. And so, there is some examples. It's just not to the wide scale as far as the employer walking in and saying, listen, give me your username and password, and let's have at it. I want to see everything you've got on.
Representative Hansen, the example that Representative Beadle just cited, is that affected by this bill at all? If I don't like my employer, I decide that Gary Ameneth is the world's greatest
dirty dog.
Dirty dog. Yes. fine.
I did it.
And I go down there and I go to my Facebook page and I say, Gary Emineth, I can't stand that guy. And he fires me, which he can't do, by the way. But
he's a partner.
Yeah.
I was wondering why you made that post.
I got it.
Does
right
it affect a situation like that where an employee is as critical of his or employer?
It would depend on how it was gone about. If the employee has kept strict privacy settings on their network, as it's become widely available on most networks, including Facebook, it wouldn't unless the employer. Well, it would because then the employer would have to seek after their private information or to log in. If they've made it public, they've made it public. It's like putting something on your lawn. Anyone can drive by and they can see it. And at that point, it's your fault for putting it up there. If you have the kind of boss that would can you for putting a public statement about how much you can't stand them. However, if you're there's a lot of folks that I know that have a private, personal circle of friends that they can either talk politics with or talk their personal feelings with, or they just have a small circle of people. And there's a lot of older folks that have joined, say, Facebook, that just want to keep it to their family and don't allow outside influence or advertisements to come to. In that case, the employer could only see it if they bother to get past the privacy settings, in which case this bill would affect it. So if it's public, if you set up, it's like if you went down to Peacock Alley and started downstairs here and started trashing Gary. If you make it public, it's public. But if it's private, this keeps it private.
Well, and Dale, I'd like to just kind of jump in on that, too.
Certainly.
One thing to remember is North Dakota is a right-to-work state. So, if you're blasting your employer, that the employer can terminate you really for whatever reason under the sun they decide.
I was going to say
make
they can terminate you if you're not bashing them too.
But one thing that this bill does is if you're terminating them on your private account, they somehow catch wind of it. This makes it so that the employer can't go to you and say, listen, you need to show me this. You need to show this to me. So it's making it so that you're not required to incriminate yourself to your employer.
And if your employer gets access, if I understand the bill correctly, Representative Hanson, you have a right to sue him.
It's against the law, so
Yeah.
yes, it would be grounds for lawsuit should you want to do that, or you could bring this to their attention and resolve it amicably on the side, as many court cases would. That's the same as any other lawsuit.
Yeah, the reason I mentioned it is because at the very end of the bill, it talks about instituting the right to institute a civil action in a court of competent jurisdiction to enforce this law. Well, gentlemen, I wanted to ask each of you a bit about yourself. Representative Hanson, what do you do for a living, and why did you run for the legislature?
Oh, this will be amusing when we get to the whole table. I'm in commercial real estate, actually, with Keller Williams. I can even give you a card if you really want.
I would like that, yes.
Well, you bet. And I ran for the state legislature because, for a multitude of reasons, I do like my home state quite a bit. We are going through quite a tumultuous time here, both good and bad with the oil boom. I've been fascinated by things like infrastructure, city development, city planning. They're on the periphery of what I do in commercial real estate, or I'm able to do there. And it's very important that we have someone jump in and do the nitty-gritty, read through as many bills as possible, read through as many charts as possible to make sure that we're doing right by our citizens at this kind of extreme time. And on the other end of it, within my family, my grandfather was a state senator up in District 2, up in Divide in Williams County. Actually, he was the senator from Patrick Hattelstad, your previous. No, Patrick is District 1 in Williston. I'm sorry.
Correct.
He was the state senator up north, and I always admired him and thought that was a good way of spending your time and effort serving your community. And when I had the opportunity to do it, when a new district opened up in Cass County, I jumped in and took advantage.
What was your relative's name? Was in the legislature?
His name was Erwin Hansen, but everyone knew him as Bud Hansen.
Mm-hmm.
If you know, you would have known Bud Hansen if you sit in
yes.
the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you remember Bud?
Oh, yes.
Okay, that was my grandpa.
I'll be darned. I never would have guessed that. Mr. Beadle, why did you run for the legislature, and tell us a bit about your background?
Well, of the three legislators here, this is my second session, so unlike the other two, I'm not a freshman. Here's where the humor is. I'm the commercial director for KW Commercial Real Estate out of Fargo, North Dakota. KW is short for Keller Williams Commercial Real Estate. Ben and I work in the same office. We've been actually friends since high school. I keep trying to get him to move a little more right in his politics, but it is what it is.
Not working.
No, not yet. But
use your salesmanship.
He might be coming around.
Tell him who your grandfather is. This would be even funnier.
I was elected in 2010. I was encouraged to run because we had an opening in District 27. There was only one incumbent Republican, Randy Boehning, and the senator, Jim Pomeroy, was retiring, the Democratic senator, and so Representative Lee Meister, the incumbent Democrat, chose to run for the Senate seat. So we had an open house seat. And so I had been active in party politics locally. My stepfather, Tony Grinberg, has been in the Senate representing District 41 since 92 was when he was elected. And my grandfather, Earl Strinden, served from 66 to 88.
Oh, wow. You know
and
that?
so I've had kind of grown up with it. My first Republican convention was in 1988 when I was 1. When my grandfather was seeking the Senate seat. So it's kind of been an active part of my life, and all my background in speech and debate and everything just kind of made it a smooth transition. But so I ran at that time kind of because the opportunity presented itself, and I've always kind of been around with it. But
what's interesting is when Representative Strinden ran for the U.S. Senate, I was the executive director as a young guy about your age of the Republican Party, and so I was very intimately involved with Earl, and I loved him going out and speaking at events. And one thing about him, if he had to go to Watford City on a night like tomorrow night when it's 25 below and there might be 18 people there, he would never turn you down. If his schedule was free, he'd drive 3 hours each way to go to an event. And that's what you got to love, is people that give public service, Republican or Democrat, to the cause.
Well, absolutely. So. And that's one of the things that, since I was very little, my grandfather bestowed upon me, was the importance of public service. It's not that you're running for political office. Yeah. This isn't politics. It's public service. Yeah. And so no matter what, you're here for the people you represent and to do the best for the state that you possibly can. And you go about that with whatever way you can. And that's one of the things that he's bestowed upon all of his grandchildren and his children. And so he's definitely been a big factor. And frankly, his cadence of his voice is just so distinct that as I'm voting,
among other things,
as I'm voting on the floor, I can hear him, just speaking in my head, kind of guiding me a little bit.
Heard
is it really nasal?
That's absolutely
okay.
I've had some people who have kind of referred to him. He's been one of the strongest majority leaders in the state's history, but in the country, he was very gifted and a strong leader that way. But incidentally, I thought I would point out while I took a picture while we're talking about issues, I Twittered and Facebooked these young men, and I noticed that these guys aren't 65, so the guys that are introducing the bill that are co-sponsors, these guys are all, I suspect, all under 30. Or very close to it if they aren't. And so it's a generational issue, and I think it's great to see young men like this and involved in the process and looking at issues that impact their next generation.
One of the reasons I thought the bill was attractive is, one thing, it's a novel piece of legislation in this session, and also I do think it is because we have an influx of younger people into the legislature this year, and they're bringing their own issues and concerns, and this is one that they maybe I'm using collective they, abusing it a bit, but this is one that someone of Representative Hansen's age would be more aware of than someone of my age would be, and that's good, because you need to have a broad perspective of issues in the legislature, and I don't think that a legislature dominated by retired farmers would have introduced a Facebook bill, and so it's good that we have a fusion of some young talent to get some additional different issues for us to chew over.
Yep, absolutely. That's absolutely awesome.
Mr. Boshi, I forgot to ask you. I'm sorry, I was getting to you. We talked about where you work. Why did you get into politics?
And how many of your grandparents and grandrelatives are state
do you have any relatives who are president of the United States?
Well, unlike these two fine gentlemen across from me, I come from a non-political family. The most controversial thing we talk about at the dinner table is the weather. And so my involvement in politics has kind of evolved from my organizing background. I've worked on a college campus, so engaging young people and getting involved has been important to me, and that kind of evolved into some community organizing. I worked on a presidential campaign in 2008 organizing college students and kind of moved forward. But if you would have asked me a year and a half ago if I thought I would be serving in the House of Representatives, I would have thought you were crazy.
Why is that?
I like the behind-the-scenes action. Okay. I like the organizing piece, so this is a whole other ball game, and it's fun, learning a lot, but also kind of can be, as you've identified, a unique voice here in Bismarck, kind of bringing down that generation gap.
You mentioned that you like behind-the-scenes action. Well, what do you think now of the front-of-the-scenes action?
Well, I think there's still a lot of behind-the-scenes action happening. So kind of put my organizing skills to work as we start working on legislation, identifying who would be some key people to partner with on this, and what's important to different legislators based on their constituency and their values, and trying to kind of persuade them that way versus just this is a good bill. We're really working on passing legislation.
Okay, you bring your skills as a community organizer to this milieu here. How do you how does that work? I mean, you're trying to organize support for or opposition to something. How do you go about that?
It's really about listening. It's getting to know the other legislators, and like I said, who are their constituents, what's important to their constituents, what's important to them. We kind of have a diverse population in the House right now, as far as, we have some very progressive people all the way down to Libertarian and Tea Party and everything in between. So it's trying to, understand what's important to them, and how does a certain piece of legislation, like a Facebook bill, play into what a person with a Tea Party value system would appreciate, or a Libertarian or a progressive or anything in between.
What, Representative Hansen, you and Representative Boschee are Democrats, and you have, frankly, you're outnumbered 2-1 in the House by Republicans.
Whatever do you mean? I think you mean 3-1. Keep going.
Okay. Anyway, how does that, is that something that you recognize?
I never recognize it if I can help it.
Okay. I'm just thinking, is it, do you feel, I guess, just put it crudely, do you feel oppressed or ignored or anything of that nature?
No, I think, we have a lot of energy in our caucus, a lot of experience and new energy, and we're just excited to be part of finding solutions to what's facing the state.
There's 94 people at the end of the day. You just talk to everyone. Some you get to know, some you become pretty good friends with, some you don't wind up seeing that much because they're in a different committee than you. You don't have to run into them. Whether Republican or Democrat, they've probably got a relative who's related to you because it's North Dakota. You can connect on some level, and you can work, and you start finding common ground and work together from there. It's like anything else. We've
been speaking this evening to Representative Ben Hansen, a Democrat from West Fargo, Representative Tom Beadle, who is a Republican from Fargo, and Democrat Joshua Boschee, who is a Democrat from Fargo. Thank you, gentlemen, for coming. We appreciate having you here, and thank you very much.
Cass County thanks you for your time.
Oh, certainly.
Thank you, and we really appreciate the outlet as well. I love the new show, Gary. I love the fact that you're working to get a more informed constituency out there.
Thank you very much. Broadcasting live from Peacock Alley. Thanks for joining us.